Your view on what this is a signal to the market, this IPO from Amer Sports?
Well, I mean, it is a data point for sure. The brands that Amer Sports owns, are venerable brands, have been around for a while. The company showed good growth in both revenue and EBITDA, but it was laden with debt. It was a highly leveraged company, and the market has been punishing highly leveraged companies for a long time. Even though rates have come down, they're still relatively high relative to where they were a few years ago. And so, I think the market is still taking a wait and see approach. I think underwriters clearly misjudged demand. In fact, in this case, what was interesting is 60% of the IPO was bought by insiders. Normally, that's a really strong signal that should stimulate demand. So this IPO is almost completely carried by inside investors. There was very shockingly little outside interest. So this is a data point. It's a different type of company. I think when we see some more traditional, companies that are, maybe a little bit earlier, but with real growth stories and unlevered, I think that'll be a better benchmark as to how the IPO market really is right now.
Is it a starter gun for the 5 or so actual technology companies that are waiting in the wings as IPO candidates?
Well, I wouldn't. It doesn't really feel like a big breath of wind when they priced, 23.5% below the midpoint of their filing range. We'll see how they trade today. I mean, let's hold out a verdict until we see how it trades. But I wouldn't say it's a big starter gun. Doesn't mean the IPO market's going to close. And we had another sort of poorly performing IPO last week with BrightSpring that's traded down 15% in a week and also priced below its midpoint of its range. But both of those companies, as I said, were highly levered. So I don't draw a lot of conclusions, frankly, from either of these two IPOs. I would like to see how, I think Reddit might be one of the next companies to come out. I would like to see how more traditional tech companies that are venture backed that don't have a long history and have significant leverage, I'd like to see how those companies price. So I don't think there's a ton to learn right now from either of these two IPOs.
Let's therefore focus in on the reporting that was of this week, that Reddit is looking at coming in the near future trying to get a sense of what market capitalization, whether it's $5 billion or so, which is a significant haircut from where they last raised money at. But you've been highlighting some of the names that might well come to the market as well as Reddit. You've got Stripe, Turo, Chime, Databricks, ServiceTitan. Are we likely to see some pain for previous rounds of late-stage investors, and what recompense did they get?
It's a really interesting question. Reddit's last round valuation was $10 billion, in sort of the height of the market in 2021. I think that given they've performed reasonably well, they filed for IPO at the end of 21. They said they were going to do $1 billion of revenue in 2023. They did, sounds like by reports, somewhere closer to 800 million. So they are growing reasonably well. But, I think that would suggest a valuation, in an IPO in the, 4 to 6 billion range. So how do last round investors who paid 10 billion feel about that? It'll be an interesting discussion between last round investors and current investors and potentially, IPO investors. But this is a problem that a lot of companies are facing. We saw, Instacart when they went public, they had a $39 billion, last round valuation. Then they went public at around 10 billion. So this is the medicine that I think companies are going to have to take to get to the IPO markets. Yeah. But we're going to see a lot of interesting negotiations between last round investors and underwriters at this point.
And the reason, Greg, we have your expertise on the show is because you are there helping make markets in pre-IPO names. And I'm interested as to what appetite is like at the moment, what sort of valuations you're tending to see in these transactions.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen a significant drop-off in valuations over the last couple of years, with a couple of exceptions. Clearly, the AI space has been a rocket ship, as has the rocket company, SpaceX. So there's been a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, we've seen, significant, devaluation in a lot of these high-flying companies. Reddit, we've recently seen trading, start to pick up a little bit as investors feel that an IPO is forthcoming. But we're seeing pricing in, just below 5 billion range. But as a general rule, we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick in both demand and in valuations. And I think that bodes well for, a healthy IPO market should, most of the other economic indicators sort of stay stable as they are now.